This is the nature of everything. Don't stay stuck.
All right, so real talk. We might say some stuff today that's it might sound counterintuitive. It might even be a little spicy. So buckle up.
Spicy. All right. Well, here we go.
So a lot of what you've been told, what we've been told about boundaries, especially by like Instagram therapists and self-help books, and by that lady in that linen jumpsuit that tells you to use your boundary voice, a lot of it's just wrong, or at least some of it's wrong.
Mm.
So it's just kind of like weak sauce dressed up in therapy language.
Wow. Yeah, you are definitely coming out of the gate with some strong words.
Well, they are strong words, but honestly, I'm kind of tired of being misled by the gurus. And so, you know what, we can back up these thoughts.
You know what? You're absolutely right. And on Tuesday, we did crack open like the basic reframe of this idea of, you can't call me after 9 versus simply, I don't answer the phone after 9. And like instead of demanding, how others function, we need to take care of our own boundaries. And so today, let's go past that and way past that because we are going to talk about why most boundaries that people set actually it's really just manipulation. It's disguised, but it's still just manipulation. For instance, you don't owe anyone an announcement. It's just not necessarily. Like why wanting closure is a control move and why the freedom on the other side of all of this isn't what you think it is.
And I do want to say something real quick because I was just fussing about the gurus. Like,
Mhm.
this is not a lecture,
Mhm.
and we are definitely not gurus. We're
Mm-mm.
certainly not therapists. We're
Mm-mm.
just a couple of guys who fell for most of that weak, advice ourselves before we kind of started to figure out the difference. We've done the cringy announcements. We've waited for closure that would never come. I mean, we performed the boundary instead of actually holding it. Like we know all about that, but not because of Instagram, but because we learned it the hard way.
Yeah, and yeah, to that point, like we're gonna be calling ourselves out on this one as well. So if you're listening, that means you know what, y'all are our friends too. And like don't worry, we'll come back to that.
Yeah. So I guess I was so excited about this, I just jumped in, right? But welcome everybody to the Nature of Everything podcast. I'm Bo.
And I'm Clint.
And look, we are here to explore personal development through our framework coin. Confirm it, own it, be intentional, and change the nature of everything. So, welcome back, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, on Tuesdays, we generally crack something open, and on Fridays, we work through it. And today we are coining boundaries. And while we're at it, we're gonna call bullshit on some stuff. And so something that's not bullshit, however, is the fact that we want you to go to thenatureofeverything.com and grab the book. If you hadn't done that yet, do that and that will help out with everything else we're ever going to do in life while you join us.
I love it. Okay, foundation here, real quick. A demand is something that you require from someone else. A boundary is something that you decide for yourself. You can't talk to me like that. Well, that's a demand. I don't engage with conversations where I'm being told to like this. That's a boundary. One of those depends on them and the other depends on you.
Hey, and before we go too far, we also try to bring in words from other folks, whether it's research or other people's writings, other people's findings. We like to bring that in. And so, with that, exactly to what Bo's talking about, the reason that the demand version of what we're talking about doesn't work, Dr. Henry Cloud, who wrote the book Boundaries, this is back in 1992. In that, his core idea is a boundary is like a property line. It defines what's yours, whether it's your feelings, your choices, your behaviors, simply yours. The minute you make the line about their behavior, you've stopped talking about a boundary and started talking about, like you said, a demand. Even if you use the word boundary, you're not actually functioning that way.
And look, I think that's where we want to stop and just sort of like call BS on that because this wellness industry, like all the gurus,
Mm.
they've spent just years teaching people to dress demands up in boundary language, therapy talk. I'm setting a boundary became the new because I said so.
Enter stomping foot, crossing arms, and looking angry, right?
Hmm.
But and to your point, this is where it gets interesting because you think about it, like reframe number one. Most of what people are calling boundaries right now is actually emotional like shoplifting. They're using language to take something that they didn't earn. All right, and I know that sounds crazy, but think about it. Like usually control over someone else's behavior, that's what you're attempting. You're trying to sound healthy while doing it, but again, it is stomping your foot, crossing your arms. I'm not gonna do it. Temper tantrum, doing something that's actually not working.
I kind of get what you're saying, but for the sake of the listener, like, give us an example.
All right, so I'm setting a boundary that you can't bring up my parenting in front of my mom. That's stomp my foot and say this. I'm setting a boundary right now. You can't bring up my parenting in front of my mom. Well, actually, that's not a boundary. That's a request for behavior change, almost like with a permission slip. Like I'm setting this boundary that we don't talk about politics at Thanksgiving. Same thing, you're using boundary as like a force multiplier, and you're hoping the word itself will make people or the person that you're talking to like fall in line, get in line, because the culture has trained us to treat these demands as boundaries, and because we believe it's a boundary, then somehow it's sacred.
Yeah, and you know what? We've all done that.
Hmm.
I've absolutely used the word boundary to try to win an argument or shut
Hmm.
down a conversation that I didn't want to have.
Absolutely. 100% same. And so again, this isn't us throwing rocks at stuff and pointing fingers. Seriously, to your point, yeah, you've done it, I've done it. Might do it later. I don't know. The day's not over,
Right.
so it could happen.
And look, the reason it doesn't work, even if it sounds healthy, is the same reason demands never work. Because the second the other person ignores your boundary, the boundary's broken, which means that it was a demand the whole time. You just made it sound, I don't know, helpful or healthy or something.
Lipstick on a pig, right?
Hmm.
There's some good language that goes along with this. There's a book called Set Boundaries, Find Peace, and it talks about boundary misuse and using the word to control or shut down conversations in your own way. Yeah, I mean, basically, what you're talking about is dressing your demand up, and what it, well, what that is just cosplay. I mean, it's just boundary cosplay. It's Halloween. It's Halloween cosplay use of words in the sense that you're playing the part of someone with supposedly, and I'm using air quotes because you can't see me, quote, healthy boundaries. And you're not actually doing the work of establishing boundaries. It's just boundary misuse.
Boundary cosplay, that's harsh.
Well, and it's accurate though.
But look, this is where I want to get a little woo woo for a second too. Think about like something like the law of attraction and how that really works. Like the legit version, not the say it three times in the mirror and a Tesla appears, not that kind. But the real teachers in that space, they all say the same thing. The affirmation isn't the move. Like we say that. That's why we say confirm it, not
Mhm.
affirm it.
That's true.
Saying I'm rich doesn't make you rich. And in fact, every time that you affirm I want to be rich, you're inadvertently telling your own brain that you are, in fact, not rich. You're enforcing the lack.
Mm. I see. The wanting actually is the lacking as well.
Yeah. And because that's true, the ones who know what they're talking about, they would say that you have to have the feeling already to have the thing, not to say the words, not to perform an affirmation, but to embody the state.
I see that you're woo woo there. That's good, but um, it does map perfectly onto boundaries in what we're talking about because every time you announce, no, I'm setting this particular boundary. Well, you're broadcasting that you don't actually have it set yet. Like you're saying it, but who are you needing to say this to? What you're
Right.
announcing is a good point. Like what you're announcing is what you're lacking. And you're operating from the position of someone who's trying to install the boundary at the time, which means it's not in place yet. Like it's still waiting to be in place, which means it's a demand.
And look, it goes back to if it's about you, then it's a boundary. And if it's you telling somebody else what to do, it's a demand.
Mhm.
And which a real boundary, something that you decide for you that you're going to do or not do, that doesn't have to have an announcement. It just is. But you don't pick up the phone after 9. That's the boundary. Telling people that you're not going to pick up the phone after 9, that's still just sort of like the old system. You're still kind of seeking their permission there. You're trying to get them to sort of agree with it, but it's not a boundary.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the difference between I'm trying to be a person with boundaries and I'm a person with boundaries. And only one of those actually works.
I mean, the test is simple. Am I trying to change them or am I going to change me? And again, if the answer is change them, then you don't have the boundary. You just have desire. I wish they would stop.
It's cosplay. Again, that's yeah, it's a hope to have something one of these days and you're putting, makeup on it is all you're doing.
And,
Yeah.
and look, sometimes you do want to ask someone to change their behavior. That's fine, but that's a request. That's a normal human thing, but it's a different conversation than a boundary. I just would encourage us all to not compare those as the same thing because they're not. Because the second that you call your request a boundary, you've armed yourself with a fake weapon. And then it doesn't work, and you blame the other person for violating your boundary instead of accepting the fact that you made a request and they declined.
Sure. Declining your request actually isn't a violation. It's them just saying no to your request.
Yeah, I'm all right. So reframe number two on this, and this one's going to make some people mad. It makes me mad.
We'll throw it out. I'm ready.
You don't have to tell people your boundaries. There's no
Mhm.
announcement requirement, like we said. That whole "I'm setting a boundary with you" speech. The internet says like you got to tell them that, but like it's just kind of productive.
Yeah, and it contradicts basically everything that we see in the world of social media therapy.
Yeah, all of the little quote posts and bumper stickers. All right. So look, if your boundary is I don't answer the phone after 9, like don't announce it. Just don't answer the phone. You don't owe anybody the memo. You don't have to send a press release or issue a statement or hire a lawyer. Like the boundary is just you, and that's it.
And to your point, look, this is where it gets interesting, like psychologically. Often, the announcement of the boundary, it's actually manipulation. It's an attempt at manipulation. So you're not really telling them so they can prepare. You're telling them so they'll behave differently, which is your desire. You want them to behave differently, but it's a demand. But like you don't have to issue a statement. You don't have to sit in the way you say, send a press release. You don't. Because actually, the fact that you're making the announcement, like, that's the giveaway.
Well, I mean, it's kind of staying away from doing the hard work, which boundary setting is,
Sure it is.
by
Sure it is.
sort of saying, like, I want you to know that I'm setting this boundary. So maybe you'll get on board and I won't
Mhm.
have to actually hold the boundary.
Yep.
You're trying to get them to do the hard work.
And there's research behind this. It backs it up indirectly, but there's some research that came out of Harvard that it's called ironic process theory. So this came out in the 80s, still relevant. The basic finding is that the more you announce or focus on something you're trying to suppress or control, the more it actually shows up and rears its ugly face and intrudes on everything that's going on. Classic example. Are you ready? Let's do a quick experiment. Right now, try not to think of a white bear. There
Thanks.
you go. See, now you can't stop thinking about white bears. Like they're just they're in your mind right now.
Yeah, this is that little law of attraction idea that I was trying to get across. Yeah.
Sure. And so with that, the same thing applies when we're talking about boundaries. The more that you announce them and you post about them or you send up those smoke signals about them, ritualize them really, and just really pour all of your energy into it, the more you do this, like the more you're giving into this very dynamic that you're trying to step out of. So quietly held boundaries, the stuff that you're not announcing, those are usually stronger than all of these loudly yelled out, stomping foot, dramatic
Yeah.
style things. Because realistically, when you think about it, the loud ones, they're like still like, yeah, I think you said it earlier. You said still operating inside the old system. I can't think of a better way to put that. Like, that is exactly what's going on because the quiet ones absolutely operating outside of that old system.
Yeah, and look, you can absolutely just change your behavior. You
Mhm,
don't owe anyone an explanation. Like, you can just stop answering the phone late at night. You
mhm.
don't have to address it. Like, you can just stop volunteering for extra work at the office. You don't have to explain. You can stop replying to those passive aggressive texts that Becky gives you. I mean, like, you don't
Becky.
have to. I don't know. I'm sorry to all the Beckys,
Sorry,
but I mean,
Becky.
like, but I mean, you don't have to acknowledge it.
Well, and to your point, look, some people are gonna take notice. Some people will recognize it, but I'd say most people won't actually notice the intentionality of it. But either way, if that's what you do and you decide that for yourself and stick to it, it holds. Those boundaries do hold.
All right, then, like the caveat here is that sometimes you do need to communicate. If your partner needs to know that you're not engaging in that heated conversation after 9, like tell them. If your boss needs to know your hours or when you're going to work or when they can expect the email return, tell them. Communication's fine. It's practical information that the other person needs to know to make their own decisions. But again, that's a nuance.
But like we said, it's not appropriate when it's a control move that you're dressing up in some way. Again, the test is simple. Am I telling them this because they need to know this information? Or am I telling them this because I want them to do something different because it's what I demand?
That is the test.
So, reframe number three, wanting closure can be a control move.
Mm, this is
Mhm,
gonna hurt. It kinda
mm.
hurts my feelings a little bit.
Yeah, it kind of it hurts to hear it, and I'm gonna let you make the case for this one. How about that? Because I don't want to deliver the hurt.
Yeah, so, we were talking about this and closure, a lot of times boundaries with relationships that have ceased. Closure is a thing that people want after those relationships, maybe they end badly or they end, or after a parent dies, before that conversation was had,
Mhm.
or a friend kind of ghosts you and you want that apology. You want them to acknowledge the thing that they did. You want an explanation that finally makes sense.
Yeah, and we frame it like it's healing too often. Like I need this to heal. And we can all hear it in our minds. I just need closure.
Yeah, and doesn't that sound healthy?
Mm,
I
mhm,
just need closure here. But look at what closure actually is. It's just wanting the other person to do something specific so that you can feel a specific way.
mhm,
And
yeah.
that's not healing. That's a very sinister but elegant form of control. Like you just handed them the keys to your peace.
Yeah, and sorry that you gave away your keys because the other party may not join in the party. They may not participate in your little game.
But I would say most of the time they won't. Either
Sure.
they're not capable or they're not willing or they're not even there anymore.
Mhm,
My parents are both gone. And are they coming back to apologize for the things that they didn't apologize for in life? No.
mm-mm.
So if I make my peace depending on getting that, then I'm never going to have peace.
And we see it all over the place with all kinds of things. With, for instance, like divorce. People sometimes wait years for their ex-spouse to finally acknowledge what happened. And
Good luck.
yeah, good luck because the conversation rarely ever comes. And even even if it does in those strangely odd rare times, it really usually doesn't deliver what people thought it would
Yeah.
because the closure that you actually want probably isn't it's not even theirs to give.
Yeah, because it's yours to claim for yourself.
Sure. Well, absolutely, and this is where boundaries get really, really radical because the boundary work in a situation where you're craving this closure, that boundary work is I'm done waiting on this person to give me something that they're never going to give. I've got to live as if the closure conversation is never going to happen because it's not. It's really not going to happen. And so therefore, the work for this is I'm not putting my life on hold for it.
Mm. I mean, that's an incredible way to look at a boundary,
Mhm.
because look, that's not bitter, that's freedom.
It is freedom. It is. And we've talked about this on previous episodes. Like there's a whole therapy approach to acceptance and commitment therapy. And like we've referenced it before because the research on that, I mean it's good. Because remember one of their core findings after all the decades of their research is that psychological flexibility, like the ability to accept what you can't control and then commit to what you can. Like those are the two pieces of this. Like these outperform emotional regulation. That's a strategy for nearly every measurable outcome, whether it's anxiety, depression, whatever it's going to be. Like the whole spectrum gets covered with that.
Which I would say is the science version of what we
Mhm.
just said, right?
Sure it
To
is. Yeah.
to stop trying to control the things that you can't control and to get clear on what's inside you and live from that space.
Certainly. And we've heard numerous like phrases that are very similar to that because boundary work is exactly that. Closure seeking is not that. Closure seeking is the opposite. It's one more attempt to control something that's not yours to control. Like
Mm.
again, you can't control someone else's acknowledgement. Like that just doesn't work.
I do want to be careful. Like wanting an apology, that's not bad. Wanting to be acknowledged, like that's not bad. Hoping for it, that's fine. But needing it in order to move on and to live your best life, that's where you've handed back your life to the person who hurt you or did you wrong or whatever.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And to your point, this isn't only about people who are, somehow gone or like y'all are separated or estranged in life. That's it's not only for that. This same thing happens in your current relationships, your current work relationship. Like you're waiting for whether it's your partner to finally understand why this particular thing hurts you or bothers you, like or you're waiting for your boss to just like really finally see what all you've contributed. We know plenty of people who are just waiting for some sibling to finally apologize for that thing that happened, last century. And realistically, like as long as you're waiting, you said it earlier, like your peace of mind now rests in their control. Like you've given that away. You've given them the keys to your car with that.
Yeah. And look, I don't appreciate you calling me out.
Well, this is the whole episode is calling us both out.
I know, but
Mhm.
but the boundary version is I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not making my life a hostage situation to another person's agreeing with me.
I mean, that's a if you're not careful, that's a life sentence.
Like the strange thing is when you genuinely stop needing it, sometimes that's when you actually get it,
Sure.
because you stopped operating from that place that was repelling it. So we burned down a few sacred cows here. But let's talk about what actually happens in your body when you start to hold real boundaries, because this part, is definitely not on the bumper stickers.
Well, and luckily this is again, this is where science comes in and it's pretty cool. There's a neuroscientist that developed something called the polyvagal theory. This work basically explains why setting a boundary feels like a physical event, not just a mental one, a physical event. And so, how we get there? Your vagus nerve is basically the highway, the nervous highway between your brain and your gut. Okay, your vagus nerve regulates your heart rate, your breathing, your stress response, oftentimes whether or not you're conscious. And so, crucially, it regulates how you read social signals. Lots going on with this. When you've spent years answering the phone, every time this particular person calls, then that pattern is wired into your nervous system, not just your psychology. Your vagus nerve has now been trained to release specific things in a certain way when you get that stimulus. So if you've always had a practice of answering the phone when so and so calls, or especially whether it's your boss or your mom or whatever it's going to be, your partner, if that is what you always do, you're wired to that.
So you're saying that your body actually doesn't know what to do?
It knows that, well, it's wired to know that it's supposed to have a literal physical response now. So when that phone rings and you see that name on caller ID, for instance, then it like that name comes up on your phone. I said caller ID. And I know for some of our younger listeners, you don't know what that is, but that was something that we used to have. Now it
The
just comes
caller
across
ID.
now it just comes across your phone. But anyway, there is a literal physical response to seeing that when it pops up, that whatever that stimulus is, like your heart rate spikes, that nervous tightening of your stomach, like all of these things start happening. You feel that wave of guilt or anxiety, whatever it is that has
Mm.
nothing to do with the decision that you've made. It has nothing to do with any of that because the decision was already easy. The wave is that your nervous system is like catching up to what you're wired to.
But I wish I didn't know all about this, but I do. And
Oh, you
not
feel
out
it.
and I didn't read the scientific study either. This is
I know.
all right out of my own life. But
Mhm.
look, that's why people misread that the wave as you referred to it, that wave of feelings, the heart rate, the stomach tightening, that wave of guilt, anxiety. What happens is that they feel that and then they doubt themselves and they say, well, the boundary must be wrong because look how bad it feels.
Mhm.
And it's like, no, the boundary's right. You just kinda having withdrawal?
Withdrawal, boundary withdrawal?
Yes.
Okay. Well, boundary withdrawal is definitely going into a second book. That's
Yeah,
happening.
2nd edition.
Second edition, the nature of everything, boundary withdrawals. But I will say this, look, here's where there is this is where the relief comes in because there is actual real relief. The phone rings, you don't pick up. And then there's this immediate exhale, just I didn't have to do that. That is also a vagal response. That is also the vagus nerve kicking in because the relief that you feel is real as well.
Okay, but then, like you said, then comes that 2nd wave,
Mm,
the guilt, the mental rehearsal of that next conversation. What
mm.
if I'm not being the best person? Your brain will concoct these stories, and they wanna tell you just how cruel and terrible you are.
Yeah, like yeah, now you're grounded for everything. To your point, that is where most people, like us included, that's where we can fold on this, and that's where we crumple up and get wadded up because that second wave, boom, it hits and boom, cave to it, call back immediately. They send the apology text. Oh, I'm sorry, I should, I was so busy with the thing. Like we break our own boundaries during this time because that small little piece of discomfort that rears its little ugly baby head right for a bit. I mean, just feels like you're never going to get through that. You can't survive that. It's just too much. And we cave right there.
It is survivable.
Sure.
But it is very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, and something nobody really wants to talk about is that when the phone doesn't ring, you'd think you'd feel great. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes you'll catch yourself feeling like this weird anxiousness because they're not calling, wondering if they're, are they mad? Are they mad at me because they're not calling here? So what does that mean if they're not calling? I mean, that's a whole nother vagal response.
Yeah, and I guess that's why, boundary setting is hard. The boundary affects the silence too.
Absolutely. And look, the nervous system reads silence differently than most people realize. Silence isn't necessarily peacefulness. Like not automatically anyway. For for a body trained in that old pattern, in that old system that we were talking about, like silence can feel very threatening
Mm,
oftentimes
yeah.
because the old system was I mean, the old system's at least predictable in the fact that silence isn't going to be likely.
Yeah, even if it was bad. We're
Even
we're we're
yeah,
back to the comfort zone.
even if it was bad, for sure, because predictable bad, when you know that it's crappy and it's coming, like your nervous system's already calibrated for it, right? You're already practiced for that. So unpredictable better, because it's unpredictable, feels very uncomfortable. It feels like destabilizing, really, in the beginning.
That's wild to think about because your body will choose familiar suffering over unfamiliar peace, but you have to train it to think differently.
Your brain will run from the discomfort, and that's where the growth is, and we've said it over and over, and it still remains true. This is where the practice part is so vastly important to what we do. Every time you hold the line, every time you let that call go to voicemail and you don't answer it, every time, because you don't want to. I'm not saying be neglectful, but this is something that you know you've set a boundary for. Every time you sit with that wave of discomfort that hits, and instead of breaking the boundary to make that discomfort stop, you are absolutely rewiring something. Okay. And going back to it, it's the polyvagal research. It shows that this vagus nerve, it is malleable. It is plastic in its own way. It can move and it can learn. It is able to update. And so as you practice this more effectively, these waves of guilt and anxiety, like, they get smaller and they get super manageable to where they're not the discomfort piece.
Yeah, and eventually they will stop coming,
Mhm,
you know,
mhm.
or, like at some point in the process, maybe the wave still comes, but you know how to ride it out without letting it knock you over.
Absolutely, and this is where we get to what's actually, like, on the other side of all of this work that we're talking about, because people think the prize is the peacefulness. That's not wrong. I mean, it is, but peacefulness, that's not the whole story either.
Yeah, because there are different kinds of peace. There's the peace that you get from silence,
Mhm.
and there's also the peace that you get from avoidance.
Sure.
The peace that you get from never bringing it up because you don't want to deal with it.
Mm.
But that's not real peace. That's
Mhm.
just the absence of conflict.
Yeah, I would certainly agree that a lot of us confuse those.
Yeah, a lot of us. I know too. But I
Yeah,
mean, the peace that we're talking about, the real prize, is it's the peace that comes from freedom, right? Which is a totally different thing. Peace from silence, that keeps you small. But peace from freedom, like that allows you to be a whole person, the whole you.
preach it, preacher. Get in there.
Peace from silence, like it's they don't know how I really feel, so things stay smooth. I'm not going to rock the boat. You're just keeping the peace, but you're paying for it with yourself. When you get peace from true freedom, that's more like, they may know how I feel, they may not, they may agree, they may not. None of that matters whether or not I'm okay. I'm okay because I'm not living against myself anymore. It's
Sure.
all very different.
Yeah, those are 2 completely different things.
And look, only one of them is actually sustainable.
And that's where you get to say, "I am what I am," and I said what I said, I did what I did. That really is the freedom. Not that it comes with 0 consequences. It's not like that's ridiculous, but it is free. It is freeing. And most of us have spent our whole lives trying to manage other people's perceptions of us. I know I
Mm.
have. Like, I want to be seen as, kind and a good son and a good brother and a team player and a good husband and a good dad and a great friend and giving, and I want to be seen as all those, and
That's a lie.
but the problem is that we're trying to manage the perception that others have by managing our behavior, which can be dangerous, because it often means that we're doing things that we don't necessarily want to do. And I'm not saying wanting to be kind or be a good kid or be a good son, be a good husband, like, these aren't bad things. But if we are having to try to fit ourselves into molds for other people's perceptions, then that's at the expense of what we need for ourselves.
But look,
Mhm,
we have to talk about the vindication trap because most people, I don't even know if they thought through what true freedom would feel like. I know that they thought through what vindication would feel like.
mm.
They want the other person to finally see them the way that they want to be seen. I'm not the bad guy. I'm not the difficult one. I'm not the cold person. Like, see me the way I want you to see me.
That one, that's right between the eyes for me. And I do recognize that vindication and freedom are very different, but
Yeah, very
sometimes
different.
I want them to feel more aligned than they are.
Look, vindication still depends on them.
Yeah.
Freedom doesn't. Vindication says, I'll feel okay when they finally agree with me.
Mm,
Like freedom says, like, I don't need them to agree. I know what's true and I can hold it whether they ever validate it or not. And look, let me say without any hesitation, none of this is easy.
yeah, and I'm willing to say it. Like this is like boundary stuff is really one of the hardest parts for me personally. So what about you, Bo? Like what's one of the hardest parts about boundary stuff that really kicks you in the face?
I think it's this last one about vindication because
Mhm.
like my biggest trigger in life is to be misrepresented. Like,
Yeah,
that's it. Like, I can take a whole lot of things, but the idea that someone is out there telling a version of a story where I'm the villain and I have no way to correct that, like, that one just, it sets me off. I mean, that's the
yeah.
one that makes me want to cave in every time.
Yeah, well, and everybody needs to hear it. Like that comes with the territory. When you start holding real boundaries, and Bo, you're good at it. From what I've seen in life, you're actually pretty well accomplished with the boundary world, and not the kind where you're announcing them. You're not seeking closure. You're not trying to manage other people's perceptions. Like in that, I do get it. You will be misrepresented. Maybe not that often, not always, but quite a bit, and you know what? You have to be ready for it, and you generally seem that you are. It's pretty
Well,
impressive.
I'm practiced at this because of,
Mhm.
a decade worth of therapy. But like, people
It
will
matters.
tell stories about you that aren't true. And not the big T true. I mean, just the like there are nuances. Like nobody's got the whole story. A lot of times the way that people will tell the story, I mean, for their own ego, it makes them the protagonist and you're the bad guy.
Mhm.
Well, he stopped calling. He won't answer my calls anymore. Can you believe that? But they leave out the part about why you stopped. They leave out the part about what they did. You won't be in the room for those conversations and you won't get to defend yourself. And you kind of have to be okay with that.
Well, and to your point, that's why real boundaries, they have to be non-negotiable. You have to want what's on the other side, which is that freedom and the integrity of what that is and actually being your authentic self, because it has to be more than how you want to be seen accurately by everyone, because I don't guess you really get both, do you?
You don't get both. And look, that sucks. Like
Mhm.
everybody wants both. I want both.
Yeah.
But if you need everyone to see you accurately, you're going to keep performing for them. And that performance is what you're trying to step out of in the first place.
So the boundary work means in its own way that I am okay being misrepresented sometimes. Like I've got to be
Yeah.
okay with the version of me that exists in someone else's head, and it's going to be wrong. Like they sized me up wrong. They described me wrong. They presented me wrong, because the alternative to your point is living a life that's actually wrong on the inside, just to be seen in the way that you want, just to be perceived, what you view as accurately by other people. I mean, who are you paying real attention to anyway? I don't know. I see your point. That it You definitely don't want that.
But like we said, the win on the other side, the freedom, that whole I am what I am and I said what I said, man, that win is bigger than any little bit of discomfort that's going to come when you're starting to really get good at boundary setting. It just
Sure.
does.
Sure, and I can yeah, it's bigger every time, and again, keep in mind this is also not the announcement time, and you don't have to say, "I am what I am," and "I said what I said." You just did, because if you're trying to convince other people that you are what you are, well, shit, you've already lost. Like, stop it. Like, you said what you said, but, to live that, to feel that freedom of being able to just be that is bigger every time.
Yeah, but to be clear, like, and the reason we want to announce it, like, it doesn't mean none of this means that you don't care.
That's right.
We all care deeply about the people in our lives, but there's a big difference between caring about someone and managing their feelings for them.
Mhm.
Caring respects their adulthood, managing them or trying to manipulate them or trying to do all this, people aren't infants, right? I mean, like,
That's
we can
true.
be honest.
That's true. The version of you with clear boundaries is a hell of a lot more loving. Even though it may not look surface that way, it could hurt your feelings, but it actually is more loving, not less. It's not mean. If you're more available, that's better because there's actually you're actually in the room. You actually showed up. Not only were you there, you were present and you're engaged. And instead of that performance that we've talked about, like of trying to keep everybody happy in the room.
Nobody tells the most accurate version of your story anyway. Even
True.
if your favorite people were to get you wrong sometimes, the only person who really knows you, that has the most true and accurate version of you, is you.
Man, that this has been awesome. But I'll say this, look, quick warning before we close. When you start holding real boundaries, be prepared because some things could get bumpy and they can feel worse. There may be a little more conflict than there was before. It could get worse before it gets better sort of clause. And this is especially for, with people who benefited from you not having the boundaries in the first place. So kind of get prepared for that.
Yeah, so in behavioral psychology, there's a term called extinction burst. It's the idea that when you stop reinforcing a pattern that, somebody has kind of, come to expect, their behavior will escalate at first. They're going to turn up the volume. They're going to double down. They're going to try harder because their old moves, they're not working anymore. They want to restore the pattern.
You can see that in, like you said, behavioral psychology is a perfect point. When you stop giving the food pellets to the pigeons and the rats and the other like animals, they hit the lever like harder. Skinnerian effect. They hit the lever harder before they finally give up because that's the old way, for
Yeah,
sure.
and we're not different than pigeons.
Well, we're no different from the lab rats. We should definitely put that on a t-shirt. Yeah.
Look, and when the people who fold during that little challenge point and they go back to the old pattern, now that old pattern is even more entrenched because the other person learned that just pushing back harder works.
And oftentimes it does work because we even said that pressure is where we fold because it's what our vagal nerve wants to do. It's what our brain says, hey, discomfort, get it off of us. Don't want growth, want comfort. So be mindful. If you're going to put these boundaries into practice for real, things may get a little shaky and stuff for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks. Like that's not a sign that you're doing it wrong. Your system is fighting back. Their system is fighting back. So be prepared for it. Don't be mindless about it. Keep in mind that this is likely to happen and stay in it.
Yeah, and make sure that you heard us say that we're not gurus and therapists,
Mm-mm.
so that if things stay hard for 5 weeks, you're not writing to us and saying y'all said 2 or 3.
We're
Like, that's
also
not
not
right.
good at math, so it's fine.
But realize that most boundaries are being treated in the way that is sort of like emotional sabotage toward the other person. You don't owe anyone the announcements. Wanting closure, that's a control move. If you need it from them, the
Mhm,
peace that comes from freedom is bigger than the peace from silence. And you'll probably get misrepresented along the way. That's
mhm.
the cost. But the freedom is worth it. So I don't want to paint a picture that any of this is easy. It's the hardest.
And again, like we're not gurus. We're just two dudes that fell for all of the weak versions of all this stuff before, and we have figured out some of the differences. We still get to mess it up regularly and call each other out on it. We come back to it, and that's really welcome to the nature of everything. That's pretty much the whole show.
But it's also the reason that we keep doing this. The podcast, the book, the community we want to build. It's because most of us are trying to figure this stuff out alone at 1 in the morning, doom scrolling on Instagram for an answer that's just a bumper sticker or on a t shirt.
And it doesn't work. I mean, you
No.
need other people in this with you.
Yeah, because you're gonna wanna fold, and you
Sure.
need to have somebody go like, "Hey," when you're misrepresented, like for me, it worked because I knew I had just a few
Mhm.
people who knew me, the authentic me. And it was enough for them to say, hey, no matter how you're misrepresented, I know.
That's right.
And that was enough. And that is really the importance of community here. And look, if you're listening to this, we're already friends. We think we're friends.
Mhm.
So, like, go check out thenatureofeverything.com. Grab the free daily check in, 10 minutes that kind of walks you through recapping the day, talking out things that are on your mind. It gives you a little place that you could write that. And we're building the community. That's where we want this to go is people doing this hard work alongside of each other instead of alone in their heads at 1 o'clock in the morning.
All right, so a little bit of homework. Pick one place in your life where you've been doing what we called emotional shoplifting earlier, like calling something a boundary that's not really a boundary, it's just a demand. Like think about that, or something where you've been waiting on some type of closure that's never coming because you're demanding it of someone else that doesn't have to give you what you want. Or think about where you've been managing someone else's perception of you instead of just being yourself. Like pick one of those areas and finish this sentence. The line I'm going to hold for myself, regardless of what they do, is fill in that blank.
And look, don't fix it tonight. Just write it down. Take one step, one small step, Monday. One, not 10. And let that wave come when it comes. Let the call go to voicemail. Sit with the silence and see how you feel on the other side.
Put it on your calendar, as a matter of fact. Like set a hard time for when you know when these patterns generally are in place. So go ahead and set your schedule for this. Know when that's coming, know when you're going to do it. Don't let it catch you by surprise. You have the opportunity to own your own time and handle this practice the way you choose. So put it on the calendar, get it ready so that when it presents itself, you're not confused by it. You're not caught off guard.
Yeah, and I,
So,
I would encourage people to search up the shower curtain episode because you might need a little shower curtain in your life.
yeah, good point. Good point. Absolutely go check out the shower curtain episode. Great practice for this particular boundary setting piece, for sure. And also, while you're looking stuff up, find us at The Nature of Everything on socials. Drop us DMs, send us a message, email us, get in touch with us. Tell us how it's going. Let us know what's happening.
Yeah, so look, have a good weekend and hold the line for yourself. We're going to see you on Tuesday.
Before you go, just know it's time. Time to connect. Time to change the nature of everything. Find us at thenatureofeverything.com and don't stay stuck.